Agatha Raisin and the settlement at Dembley Gate. Dear listeners, welcome to tonight's mystery. I'm Sam, your host, and I'm delighted to have you join me for another captivating tale. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Share your answer in the comments. I always enjoy hearing from our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe me for more mysteries every day. Now, let's get cozy and dive into tonight's story. Chapter 1. The Quiet Before the Stir. Agatha Raisin awoke expecting a morning stitched together with predictability. A pot of strong coffee, a quiet breakfast, and perhaps a moment to admire the tidy garden she had worked on the previous week. Instead, the day announced itself with the peculiar sort of interruptions that Carsley specialized in. Before she could even open her front gate, Mrs. Boggle's enormous ginger cat sprawled across the path like a sleepy guardian, refusing to budge no matter how firmly Agatha tapped the ground. As she reached for the morning post, she spotted Mr. and Mrs. Turnbull lingering far longer than necessary by their hedge. They pretended to be pruning a plant already trimmed within an inch of its life, but their eyes flicked repeatedly toward her front door. Agatha raised an eyebrow, wondering what fresh morsel of gossip they expected to witness. She offered a crisp "good morning," which startled them into fumbling with their shears before they hurriedly retreated indoors. The village, she thought, was entirely too invested in her mornings. On the small table by the window, the mail formed a haphazard pile. Agatha sighed at the sight of yet another parcel delivered to the wrong address. Someone in the village had recently taken up ordering decorative garden gnomes, and somehow every last one found its way to her cottage first. Today's gnome, wrapped in bright paper dotted with tulips, bore a label insisting it belonged to a house 2 streets over. She pushed it aside with a resigned grunt and began sorting through the envelopes behind it. There were the usual items: utility bills, a discount flyer for a rug shop, and a postcard from a friend currently enjoying a beach holiday. But tucked between them was something out of place, an envelope made of heavy cream paper, sealed with a dark green emblem pressed into wax. The words "Dembley Gate Preservation Council" curled around the edge in ornate lettering, giving it an almost ceremonial air. Agatha felt a flicker of curiosity. Dembley Gate was a name she associated with old stone walls, sprawling fields, and occasional rumors carried on the breeze. She slit the envelope with a butter knife and unfolded the letter inside. The invitation was brief, formal, and tinged with urgency. It requested her attendance at a community settlement discussion regarding a boundary dispute. The phrasing felt unusually serious for a local matter, hinting that whatever the issue was, it had managed to ruffle more than a few feathers. She read it twice, lingering over certain lines that seemed deliberately vague. Why her, of all people? She wasn't part of any preservation council, nor had she ever expressed interest in land boundaries beyond her own garden fence. Yet something about the letter tugged at her sense of intrigue. Carsley had been too quiet lately, and the villagers' watchful behavior this morning suggested they knew more than they were letting on. She placed the letter on the table and looked out the window, noticing the Turnbulls once again peering from behind their curtains. So, something is brewing. And if there was one thing she hated more than being the last to know, she made another cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching sunlight creep across the garden. The day no longer felt simple. Something beneath its surface stirred with quiet insistence, urging her to pay attention. The letter still lay on the table, waiting. Agatha tapped it lightly, wondering who wanted her involved and why. Whatever the reason, she sensed it would pull her farther than she expected. She felt curiosity sharpening today. Agatha decided a walk to the village shop might clear her thoughts, or at least distract her from the unsettling curiosity that the Dembley Gate letter had stirred.
The morning air was cool and bright, carrying the distant sound of birdsong and the comfortable hush that Carsley wore like a familiar shawl. Yet something in that hush felt charged, as though the village itself held its breath. The bell above the shop door chimed as she stepped inside, releasing the warm scent of baked goods and the faint perfume of lavender sachets hanging by the counter. Mrs. Burstall, the shopkeeper, looked up from arranging jam jars and offered a smile that flickered with unusual interest. "Morning, Agatha," she said, her tone carrying a hint of expectation. "You're out early. Needed tea, and a reason to escape the parade of garden gnomes being delivered to my doorstep." A few regulars chuckled softly from the back of the shop, but Mrs. Burstall only nodded, her eyes drifting toward Agatha's handbag, as though searching for something. Agatha knew that look. It was the universal Carsley expression for, "You know something, and I want to know it too." She placed the tea on the counter. "Go on, then. What is it you're dying to ask?" Mrs. Burstall hesitated, then leaned forward. "Have you heard about the goings-on over at Dembley Gate?" Agatha kept her expression neutral. "I've heard nothing except what's written on this morning's mail, and even that wasn't particularly clear." "That estate," Mrs. Burstall murmured, lowering her voice, "has had more trouble in the past month than in the last 20 years combined. Folks say strange things have been happening over there. Lights on at odd hours, people seen walking along the boundary after dark, and the family's been keeping quiet about it." Agatha took her tea packet back from the counter, giving herself a moment to absorb the information. "Strange things? Such as?" Before Mrs. Burstall could answer, Mr. Giles from the post office entered the shop, humming with forced cheer. "Talking about Dembley Gate again, are we?" he asked, selecting a newspaper. "Everyone's buzzing about their little boundary scuffle. Can't see why it should cause such a fuss." "Oh, hush," Mrs. Burstall said. "You've heard the rumors same as everyone." "Rumors," he repeated lightly, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. "Best not repeat what you can't prove." Agatha watched the exchange with growing curiosity. The way the two villagers danced around their words, careful yet eager, reminded her of people trying to carry a secret without dropping it. She turned slightly, noticing another customer pretending to examine a display of honey jars while clearly listening in. "So," Agatha said calmly, "is this dispute truly as fierce as you're all making it sound? Or are we talking about villagers who've taken neighborly bickering to an art form?" Mrs. Burstall's lips pursed. "Fierce isn't the right word. Unsettling, perhaps. Things feel different around the estate, as if someone has stirred up old history better left tucked away." Agatha's interest sharpened. "And why the sudden concern?" "You'll see soon enough," Mrs. Burstall replied, her tone drifting into a whisper. "The council has been very guarded. People have been asking questions. They don't like answering." Mr. Giles tapped his newspaper. "Best to stay out of it if you ask me." "Yes," Mrs. Burstall added, though her look implied the opposite. "Some matters aren't meant for everyone." Agatha took her change, thanked them both, and stepped outside, the bell chiming behind her. The warmth of the shop faded, replaced by a breeze carrying hints of autumn. As she walked home, her mind played over every word spoken, every hesitation, every deflection. The villagers knew something, and whatever it was, they were cautious about sharing it. Back in her kitchen, she laid the formal letter on the table once more. She read it slowly, noticing the phrasing she had skimmed over earlier. "Your presence is requested, not invited. To address pressing concerns, not to discuss. In the interest of preserving communal understanding," a phrase that often meant the opposite. There was something beneath the language, something that nudged at her instincts. It wasn't just a boundary issue. It was a problem wrapped in formality, softened with polite wording, yet edged with secrecy. Agatha tapped her fingers against the table, the quiet sound filling the room. She wasn't one to leap into village drama without reason, but the letter's tone echoed the unease she'd felt at the shop. Carsley rarely kept secrets for long. When it did, the tension always meant trouble, and Agatha Raisin could sense trouble gathering.
Chapter 2. Dembley Gate Beckons. Agatha set out toward Dembley just after mid-morning, when the village was quiet enough for her thoughts to drift without interruption. A soft veil of fog lingered along the country lanes, clinging to hedgerows and blurring the edges of distant fields. It gave the world a hushed, dreamlike quality, as though the day had not fully decided what it wanted to be. She drove slowly, letting the gentle bends in the road guide her forward while she weighed her reasons for entertaining the invitation. Part of her suspected the matter was nothing more than local fuss, yet another part felt an unmistakable pull of curiosity. The fog thinned as she approached the outskirts of Dembley, revealing broad meadows dotted with wildflowers and the faint outline of a stone wall stretching along the horizon. The road narrowed, bordered by towering oaks whose branches arched overhead like the ribs of an ancient cathedral. Agatha felt a spark of anticipation, small but persistent, growing with each passing turn. The estate had a reputation for grandeur, and she had not visited it in years. She wondered how much had changed since then, and whether the villagers' whispered concerns had any grounding at all. The iron gate appeared suddenly around a curve, rising through the mist like a monument. Tall, ornate, and aged by weather, it stood both imposing and weary, its intricate metalwork dulled by time. A pad of moss crept along the base, and one hinge looked slightly askew, as though someone had forced it open recently. Despite its elegant design, the gate carried a subtle air of neglect that made Agatha slow her steps. Estates like Dembley usually prided themselves on appearances, yet here something felt quietly overlooked. She pushed the gate gently. It groaned in protest, swinging inward with the reluctant heaviness of an old, sulking giant. A long gravel drive stretched ahead, bordered by clipped hedges on one side and an untamed patch of woodland on the other. As she proceeded, she caught sight of a man standing near a wheelbarrow filled with tools. He wore an earth-toned jacket, well-worn boots, and an expression that suggested he had been watching for her arrival long before she appeared. "Mrs. Raisin?" he called, stepping forward with a polite eagerness. "Harold Pencombe, groundskeeper here at Dembley Gate." His handshake was warm but tense, fingers curling a moment too tightly. "We're very glad you could come." Agatha studied him briefly. Harold carried himself with practiced courtesy, but beneath that veneer was a subtle strain, something quick in the eyes, something guarded in the way he shifted his weight. "You seem relieved to see me," she said lightly. "Expecting someone else?" His smile flickered. "Not exactly. It's just, well, there's been a lot happening on the estate lately. More than we'd like, truth be told." He picked up a pair of gloves from the wheelbarrow, as though they might shield him from saying too much. "The settlement meeting should begin soon. Miss Herringhay thought it best to gather everyone before matters get further muddled." Agatha folded her arms. "Muddled how?" Harold hesitated, his gaze dipping toward the gravel before meeting hers again. "It's difficult to explain without sounding dramatic. Boundaries are complicated things. People feel strongly, and when people feel strongly, they don't always behave as expected." His tone carried a weight he tried to soften with a quick, forced laugh. "Best you see for yourself, I suppose." They walked together toward the main house, the estate's silhouette emerging through thinning mist. Its windows glinted dully, and a few shutters hung crookedly, as though the building had weathered more than simple storms. Agatha felt a quiet unease settle beneath her curiosity. The invitation had suggested urgency. Harold's demeanor confirmed it. Something here was out of balance, and whatever waited at Dembley Gate was unlikely to remain peaceful for long.
Harold Pencombe led the way with a briskness that didn't match his hunched shoulders, as though he were eager to get Agatha inside the estate before anything or anyone noticed them. The path beneath their feet shifted from gravel to old cobblestones, softened at the edges by wandering moss. Even through the lingering morning mist, Agatha could see how vast the Dembley grounds truly were. Rolling lawns, pockets of woodland, and gardens that carried an air of former grandeur, now softened by time. "Beautiful place," she said, more to prod conversation than state a fact. "Oh, yes, yes indeed." Harold nodded too quickly. "Still has its charm. Lady Forsyth takes pride in keeping the front gardens in order. The rest," he waved vaguely toward the far grounds, "is more natural." Natural was a polite word for it. Agatha saw flower beds where roses tangled with nettles, a stone fountain greened over with algae, and trellises that bowed under the determined weight of climbing ivy. Yet the disarray wasn't entirely unpleasant. It gave the estate an air of mystery, like a once-spirited woman aging gracefully but refusing to hide the lines. Harold continued walking, hands clasped behind his back. "You'll see the disputed land soon enough, all rather tiresome, if you ask me." "Tiresome disputes tend not to summon private investigators," Agatha remarked. He stumbled slightly on a cobblestone, recovering with a stiff laugh. "Oh, well, Lady Forsyth prefers everything to be handled properly. Formalities. You know how it is." Agatha did not know how it was. Not here, and she suspected Harold didn't want her to. The path dipped along a row of hedges, tall and dense, their lower branches brushing the ground like skirts. The air smelled faintly of damp soil and something floral she couldn't name. "Who owns the disputed land?" she asked. "Well, that depends on who you ask. The Dembley family has always claimed it, but the residents along the boundary line believe the old map markers were ambiguous." He cleared his throat. "You know villagers. They'll quarrel over a pebble if it's shiny enough. But shiny pebbles don't usually attract trespassers," Agatha said lightly. "Trespassers?" He halted. "Trespassers? You mentioned someone sneaking around at night." Oh, that." His smile wobbled like loose jelly. "Probably just young people. Or foxes. Foxes knock things over all the time." "Foxes?" Agatha repeated, unimpressed. He resumed walking with sudden eagerness, gesturing toward an open stretch of meadow fading into woodland. "There, the disputed land is beyond that cluster of oaks. Lovely spot in daylight, though the mists cling something awful in winter." Agatha scanned the area. The grass swayed gently, but something about the stillness felt rehearsed, like a stage waiting for its actors. Then, near the hedge to her left, something caught her eye. A lantern lying on its side, its glass shattered. The metal frame bore a fresh dent. "How did that happen?" she asked, pointing. Harold glanced over, then immediately away. "Old thing. Must have fallen in the wind. There hasn't been wind this morning. Well, last night then. These grounds get drafty. Nothing to worry about." Drafty didn't shatter glass so cleanly. Agatha crouched for a closer look. The soil beneath the lantern was disturbed, subtly, but enough to suggest someone had stepped there recently. The imprint was too deep for a fox and too tidy for random chance. She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "Is this near where your nighttime visitors roam?" Harold's lips pressed into a thin, nervous line. "Miss Raisin, I really shouldn't speculate. Lady Forsyth dislikes unnecessary fuss, and I dislike unnecessary secrecy." He looked genuinely pained, torn between loyalty and relief. "You'll meet her soon. Best to let her explain." Agatha nodded, though her curiosity was already sharpening. Nature might reclaim forgotten corners of Dembley, but humans left their signs too, and some of them were clearly trying not to be noticed.
Chapter 3. The Settlement Gathering. The old drawing-room of Dembley Gate had the sort of grandeur that suggested it once hosted elegant dinners and impressive political conversations. Now, however, its long velvet curtains sagged slightly at the hems, and the portrait of a stern-looking ancestor hung crooked over the mantelpiece. Agatha took a seat near the back, preferring to observe before engaging. A mismatched group had already assembled around the oval walnut table in the center of the room. They looked less like parties to a civil discussion and more like characters who'd wandered in from different novels. Closest to Agatha sat Mr. Barnaby Felden, the village historian, whose tweed jacket seemed specially engineered to collect dust. He cleared his throat every few seconds, a pompous reminder that he considered himself the most important man in any room. Across from him,
arms tightly folded, was Lila Trent, the environmental activist who wore mud-specked boots indoors, as if daring someone to comment. Her bright green scarf looked like a banner, ready to unfurl into protest at any moment. At the far end of the table, tapping a pen against his legal pad with nervous rhythm, was Mr. Oliver Thatch, the solicitor. Every time someone raised their voice even slightly, he flinched, squinting as if calculating how many pages of paperwork the conflict might generate. And then there was Charlotte Haringey, the Dembley heir herself, perched in a carved oak chair as though it were a throne. She was tall, poised, and draped in a fitted navy coat that made her look both polished and untouchable. Her pale eyes swept the room slowly, cool and assessing, lingering longest on the people who avoided looking back. A quiet hum of tension filled the space, thick as the dust motes floating in the slanted afternoon light. "Shall we begin?" Charlotte said, her voice smooth as cold marble. "We've already begun," Barnaby Feldon muttered. "Half this group has been late every week, including you." Charlotte's expression didn't change, though a faint arch lifted one eyebrow. "The discussion cannot proceed without the landholder present, Mr. Feldon. The land you claim is yours, you mean." "I know it is mine," Charlotte replied. "Dembley records go back centuries, which you guard like royal treasure." Lila shot back. "Convenient how only you ever get to see them." Mr. Chatch raised both hands timidly. "If we could stay focused on the purpose." "No one asked you to referee," Barnaby said, cutting him off. Agatha watched the volleying jabs with growing interest. These were not mere civic disagreements. Each barb carried a history behind it, sharp with personal irritation. Even in their posture she saw the fault lines. Lila leaning toward confrontation, Barnaby stewing in entitlement, Oliver attempting invisibility, and Charlotte radiating a composed superiority that provoked rather than soothed. Charlotte folded her hands neatly on the table. "The purpose of this meeting is to conclude discussions regarding the disputed boundary line. If this continues to be dragged out due to personal distractions, I will take the matter to the land tribunal." "You would," Barnaby snapped. "And why shouldn't she?" Agatha finally interjected. Her tone was mild, but her voice cut through the argument like a bell through fog. "Surely the sooner matters are resolved, the better for everyone." All eyes turned to her, some with surprise, some with suspicion. Charlotte inclined her head graciously. "Thank you, Miss Raisin. Ah, yes. Harold mentioned you'd arrived. Your presence is appreciated." "We'll see about that," Lila muttered. Agatha sensed something brewing under the surface, a web of private motives. Barnaby's territorial pride, Lila's campaign for environmental protection, Thatch's desperation to avoid escalation, and Charlotte's icy determination to assert Dembley authority. Every one of them had a stake that went beyond maps and fences. Then, almost imperceptibly, Agatha noticed a final thread. Charlotte herself was the target of a subtle, simmering hostility. The others didn't merely disagree with her, they resented her deeply. And resentment, Agatha knew, had a way of turning land disputes into something far more dangerous.
The moment Charlotte signaled for the documents to be brought forward, the atmosphere in the drawing room shifted from tense politeness to something sharper. Mr. Thatch fumbled with a leather folder, nearly dropping it before he managed to lay its contents across the table. Several maps, yellowed with age, were pinned down by dusty paperweights, as though they might flee the scene if not restrained. "These," he announced, clearing his throat, "represent the earliest recorded boundaries of Dembley Gate. They indicate that the contested strip falls within the estate's historic perimeter." Barnaby Feldon leaned in, his spectacles sliding dangerously low. "Historic, yes, but not definitive. There are countless revisions over the years. You can't cling to parchment as if it's scripture." Lila crossed her arms tightly. "And even if the old maps claim it, that doesn't make it right. Land changes hands. Communities evolve. That area has been used by locals for decades." Charlotte's gaze narrowed. "With permission, granted verbally, Nothing more. Convenient that no one can verify that now, Lila shot back. Agatha observed the pages silently, noting the inconsistencies that seemed to bloom the longer she looked. One map labeled a boundary differently from the next. Another had a line that seemed hastily amended, the ink smudged, as though altered in a rush. Beside her, Oliver Thatch's hands trembled slightly. A letter was produced next, delicate, brittle, and sealed in a plastic sleeve. Written by the late Lord Haringey, Oliver explained, confirming ownership. Barnaby scoffed. Written to whom, exactly? Oliver faltered. It doesn't specify. That's rather odd, Agatha murmured. Charlotte's voice turned clipped. My father corresponded with many land stewards. Not all letters were personal. But without a recipient, Agatha replied calmly. It's more like a note than a formal declaration. Charlotte stiffened. Are you suggesting we fabricated this? I'm suggesting the documentation is incomplete, which leaves room for interpretation. Silence tightened around the group. Then, Barnaby, seizing the moment, jabbed a finger toward Lila. And you, don't pretend you care about accuracy. You want that land for your little activist's corner. It's not mine, Lila snapped, rising from her chair. It's for the public. Unlike your dusty archive, people actually use it. People trample history daily, without care or understanding. Their argument exploded with overlapping accusations, agitation echoing off the high ceiling. Oliver tried unsuccessfully to intervene, raising his voice only to be drowned out. Charlotte pressed her fingers to her temples, frustration flickering through her usual composure. Agatha suspected this dispute had grown far beyond what Charlotte anticipated or could easily control. Enough, Charlotte finally exclaimed, her voice slicing through the clamor. This meeting is over. We will reconvene when tempers have cooled. She stood abruptly, almost knocking back her chair. Her usual poise had cracks around the edges. Agatha rose as well, collecting her handbag slowly, watching Charlotte with renewed interest. There was more than irritation behind her abrupt dismissal. There was fear. Outside, the crisp air settled like a calming cloth over Agatha's senses. The estate grounds were quiet, though a faint rustle in the distant hedgerow hinted at unseen movement. Charlotte and Oliver stepped out moments later, both speaking in low, urgent tones. Agatha paused by the stone archway, pretending to examine a climbing rose. Their voices drifted toward her, muffled but intelligible enough. They must not find out what happened in the West Garden, Charlotte whispered sharply. If that comes to light, everything will unravel. Oliver hissed something Agatha couldn't quite catch, but Charlotte's final words carried clearly on the breeze. Make sure no more documents surface. I mean it. Agatha's heart pricked with curiosity. The maps were confusing, the letters questionable, but this was something else entirely, something buried in the West Garden, something Charlotte wanted kept silent, and Agatha Raisin had never been good at leaving things alone.
Chapter 4. Shadows in the West Garden. Agatha waited until the estate had settled into its late afternoon lull, when the air thickened with birdsong and the workers' chatter faded toward the far fields. The West Garden lay behind a crumbling stone archway, half concealed by ivy that curled in loose spirals, as though nature itself hoped to keep the place quiet. She slipped beneath the arch with a brisk, purposeful stride, telling herself she was only taking a look, not trespassing, merely observing. Even so, her heartbeats stepped up, nudged by the thrill of doing something she wasn't entirely supposed to do. The West Garden had once been a proud corner of Dembley Gate. She remembered faintly hearing that Charlotte's grandmother designed it during some golden era of manicured lawns and rose competitions. Now, it had surrendered to wilderness. Tall grass brushed her knees, and clusters of brambles shaped themselves into odd, defensive curves. Yet for all the wildness, Agatha sensed something unusual. Parts of the undergrowth leaned in unnatural angles, as though someone had recently pressed through. Branches hung broken at their tips, sap still clinging to the torn ends. She crouched to examine a patch of flattened leaves. It wasn't the disturbance of a wandering animal. The pattern was deliberate, purposeful. A narrow path through tangled growth. Someone had forced a route more than once.
Agatha traced the line with her eyes, noticing how it wound behind an abandoned fountain and toward a stretch of fence sagging unevenly. The fence looked older than the rest of the estate's borders, its wood grayed and soft at the edges. One portion dipped lower, and the ground beneath showed clear signs of shifting. Agatha stepped closer, brushing aside nettles. Her foot paused above a faint imprint in the soil, then another. They weren't crisp, but they carried enough shape to suggest boots, adult-sized, weight distributed toward the toes as though the wearer had been leaning forward, maybe hurrying. She straightened slowly. Someone had walked this route, and not long ago. The earth still held moisture from last night's drizzle, so the prints couldn't be more than a day old. She felt the familiar tightening of curiosity, the sort that always pulled her deeper than she intended to go. Beyond the fence, tucked beneath a canopy of crooked branches, sat a shed she had never noticed from the main grounds. It was small, shabby, and shockingly out of place amid the estate's grandeur. Its wooden panels slanted unevenly, and a rusted padlock hung from the door, snapped clean through. The break looked recent. Agatha approached with slow, cautious steps. The shed's window was clouded with grime, but something dark shifted inside when the breeze nudged the door. She leaned in, peering through a gap in the boards. Tools hung on the far wall, spades, rakes, clippers, all coated in dust except for one empty hook where something had clearly been removed. The shed floor showed more footprints, impressions tangled with overlapping marks as though someone had paced anxiously. A faint scent of damp earth and oil lingered in the air. Nothing alarming, yet oddly concentrated. Agatha stepped back, trying to fit these small, uneven clues together. Fresh footprints, a broken padlock, a hidden shed with tools recently disturbed. Someone had reason to come here regularly, and if Charlotte was determined to keep the West Garden a secret, this place might explain why. A jay shrieked overhead, startling her. She glanced toward the estate, half expecting someone to appear, but the garden remained still, suspended between beauty and unease. Agatha knew she should leave before she was discovered, yet each detail nudged her closer toward a truth waiting patiently in the shadows for her.
Agatha pushed open the door of the tool shed with the gentlest nudge, half expecting it to protest like the gate had. A musty, earthy smell greeted her, damp wood, old soil, and something faintly metallic. Dust motes floated lazily in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the cracked windows. Inside the air was thick, the space cluttered with rusting tools, abandoned pots, and stacks of garden twine. Yet something drew her attention immediately. The floor near the back corner had been recently disturbed. She knelt, brushing aside leaves and loose dirt, revealing footprints that led deeper into the shed. They were small, careful prints, distinct from the heavy work boots Harold wore in the mornings. Agatha frowned, following the trail with her gaze until it ended at a small, battered chest pushed against the wall. Its lid was closed, but not locked, as if inviting discovery, or testing curiosity. Opening it slowly, she revealed the contents. Torn pages from old property deeds lay crumpled together, some edges singed, others smudged with damp. Agatha recognized the ink from the maps she had seen during the meeting, but these were far older, fragments of a history deliberately hidden or forgotten. Beside them a set of muddy boots sat as though abandoned mid-use, laces loosely tied, the soles caked with dark earth. Her heart quickened when she noticed a lantern tucked behind the chest. It was identical to the broken one she had spotted earlier near the hedge. Same dented metal, same design, though this one was intact. Agatha held it up, its faint weight in her hands confirming her suspicion. Someone had been moving around here, using the garden at night, hiding evidence, and returning the lantern to avoid detection. A sudden creak from the shed's roof made her start. She froze, ears straining. Footsteps, light, deliberate, moved just outside the door. Agatha's breath caught. She glanced toward the window. Shadows flickered across the overgrown grass. Someone was watching. Someone had been here before and was now likely aware of her presence. Agatha knew she had seconds. Carefully she replaced the lantern and slid the boots back in their original positions, trying to make it appear untouched. She snatched a few of the torn deed pages, folding them carefully into her coat pocket, enough to study later without drawing immediate suspicion. One glance at the chest reassured her that nothing else could be hurriedly concealed before her departure. Slipping toward the shed's back door, she tested the handle. Locked. The front remained the only exit. With a quiet exhale, she edged toward it, ready to make a quick escape. She moved like a shadow herself, every step measured, every sound minimized. The faint rustle outside grew slightly louder, confirming her fear. Someone lingered nearby, watching. Finally, she nudged the door open, slipping out into the muted light of the west garden. Her shoes sank slightly into the soft earth, but she kept moving, heart racing, mind spinning with questions. Who had been hiding the documents? Why here, in this forgotten corner of Dembley Gate? And most pressing of all, who else knew about the secret? And what would they do if they discovered she had found it? By the time she reached the cover of the overgrown hedge, Agatha allowed herself a breath, steadying the thrum of adrenaline in her chest. She glanced back at the shed, its shadows already swallowing the door, concealing whatever secrets remained inside. Her mind raced with possibilities, plotting her next move. Someone was working in the west garden at night, leaving traces and hiding proofs, and Agatha Raisin had just become far more involved than she had anticipated.
Chapter 5. The Past Resurfaces. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Agatha's cottage, casting a soft glow across the tidy kitchen. Agatha was halfway through her first cup of coffee, savoring the comforting warmth and the gentle hum of the village awakening outside, when a hesitant knock sounded at the door. She set down her cup and opened it to find Charlotte Haringay standing there, coat slightly rumpled and expression tightly drawn. "Charlotte?" Agatha asked, surprise tinged with concern. "What brings you here so early?" Charlotte stepped inside, as though the walls themselves had offered refuge. She did not smile. Instead, her gaze flitted nervously around the familiar room, lingering on the teapot and the small vase of fresh daisies, before settling on Agatha. I didn't know where else to go," she admitted, voice low, almost fragile. "I need to speak with someone who might understand." Agatha gestured toward the kitchen table, pouring a fresh cup of coffee for her guest. "You're welcome here. Sit down. Tell me what's troubling you." Charlotte lowered herself into the chair, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken worries. Finally, Charlotte spoke, her voice hesitant but gaining strength with each word. "The disputed land, the one everyone argues about, it wasn't always a matter of public record. It was part of a private settlement, arranged decades ago, between my late aunt and the family living on the neighboring property." Agatha leaned forward. Curiosity piqued. "A private settlement? So the documents exist somewhere?" Charlotte shook her head. "That's just it. They vanished years ago. I've searched every archive, every ledger, every letter my aunt left behind, and nothing remains. The estate records show general ownership, but the specifics, the agreements, the clauses, the conditions, all gone. And now someone is using the absence of those documents to question your claim, to destabilize you." Charlotte exhaled sharply, nodding. "Exactly. Whoever is behind this is exploiting what little they know, making it appear as though the land is disputed by right, when it is not. It's unnerving." Her fingers flexed against the table edge, betraying tension she could not suppress. Agatha studied her guest. Charlotte's usually composed demeanor had cracked, revealing a vulnerability that was rare for someone so accustomed to command. "And the West Garden?" Agatha asked gently. "Does it have a role in this?" Charlotte's eyes flickered, clouded with something unsaid. She swallowed, then looked away toward the window, avoiding Agatha's gaze. I've avoided the West Garden for years. There are memories there, painful ones. I cannot explain them. Not yet." Agatha nodded, respecting the boundary without pressing. She knew enough to sense that whatever happened there was tied to both the past settlement and the missing documents. Yet Charlotte's restraint hinted at deeper layers, personal, emotional, and possibly dangerous. Charlotte's gaze returned to Agatha, tinged with a fragile urgency. "I needed to tell someone impartial, because the situation is worsening. Arguments are escalating, people are searching, and I fear that if the wrong individuals learn the truth, it could spiral beyond control." "You can trust me," Agatha said firmly. "Whatever happened, we'll approach it cautiously. We'll uncover the facts without exposing you unnecessarily." Charlotte gave a small, grateful nod, though relief did not fully reach her eyes. She shifted in her seat, glancing at the floor, hesitant to continue. I wish I could explain the West Garden, but some things remain too close. Some things I need to face on my own. Agatha placed a hand lightly on the edge of the table. Then we start with what we can. We'll deal with the rest when the time is right. Charlotte exhaled again, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. Thank you, Mrs. Raisin. You don't know how much it means to have someone who listens. I have a habit of noticing when people are holding back, and sometimes curiosity is exactly what's needed. For a few moments they sat in quiet solidarity, the soft morning light illuminating both the kitchen and the unspoken trust forming between them. Outside, the village stirred, unaware that a long-buried past was quietly resurfacing within the walls of a modest cottage, and that Agatha Raisin was now intricately involved.
Agatha pushed open the heavy wooden door of the archive house, the faint scent of parchment and aged wood greeting her immediately. Dust motes swirled in the shafts of sunlight that filtered through tall, narrow windows. Mr. Drummle, the archive keeper, appeared from behind a stack of rolled documents, adjusting his spectacles with deliberate care. "Ah, Mrs. Raisin," he said in his soft, measured tone, "back so soon? I wasn't expecting another visitor today." "I have questions that require more than tea-room speculation," Agatha replied lightly, offering a smile that softened the edge of her determination. "I need to look at the historical settlement regarding Dembley Gate." Mr. Drummle led her to a long table near the rear of the archive room, clearing off a scattering of papers to make space. "Very well," he said, producing a collection of brittle maps, correspondence, and ledger books. "These records are incomplete, I should warn you. Some documents were lost or removed decades ago." Agatha's fingers traced the edges of the old pages, careful not to tear them. She examined the maps first, noting the shifting boundaries, the annotations made in fading ink, and the occasional correction that suggested disagreements long before her time. Next, she studied letters referencing payments, agreements, and assurances between the Dembley family and the neighboring property owners. A note in particular caught her attention. It described a dispute, resolved quietly, with compensation, though details were frustratingly vague. "Quietly?" Agatha murmured. "No names? No specifics?" Mr. Drummle shifted uneasily. "That is correct. The matter was handled discreetly at the time. Few records remain because the family wanted it that way." He paused, adjusting his spectacles again, before offering a small, reluctant sigh. "If you're asking about Lady Haringey's aunt, well, her last months were troubled. I only know what was recorded here, and even that is scant." Agatha noted the hesitation in his voice. "Troubled? In what way?" He shook his head. "I'm afraid I cannot say more. Records are incomplete. Some matters were never meant to be fully documented." The sense of something deliberately hidden prickled at Agatha's mind. It wasn't unusual for estates to obscure sensitive affairs, but the combination of lost deeds and the mention of personal difficulty hinted at a deeper story, one that might connect the missing documents, the West Garden, and the unrest surrounding the current dispute. Agatha carefully replaced the records, thanking Mr. Drummle for his time. "You have been most helpful. Even partial records are better than none." He inclined his head politely, his expression neutral but tired. "Do be cautious, Mrs. Raisin. Some histories are safer left undisturbed." She stepped outside into the bright, cool afternoon, carrying fragments of knowledge and more questions than answers. The village street was quiet, the kind of calm that felt almost staged. As she rounded the corner toward her car, a movement caught her eye. A parked vehicle along the lane had a darkened interior, and someone inside seemed to be watching. A shadow shifted, the outline of a person seated just beyond the steering wheel, eyes hidden but intent unmistakable. Agatha's pulse quickened, though she remained composed. Whoever it was, they had taken note of her movements and possibly her discoveries. With a steady breath,
She adjusted her coat and walked toward her car, aware that the quiet satisfaction of uncovering historical fragments had now been threaded with the chill of being observed. The past was never entirely behind her, and in Carsley, secrets had a way of reaching into the present, waiting for the right moment to surface.
Chapter 6. Tensions Mount. Agatha returned to Dembley Gate under the soft haze of early afternoon, the estate bathed in the golden warmth of lingering sunlight. She found Harold by the side of the main house, inspecting the flower beds near the west garden, his hands dirtied from morning work. He looked up, startled, as if he had expected solitude. "Mrs. Raisin," he said, wiping his palms on his jacket. "Back so soon?" "Yes," Agatha replied evenly, studying him closely. "We need to talk about the shed and the lantern." She held up her hand, letting the memory of the broken and identical lanterns hang unspoken for a moment. "I found traces of recent activity there." Harold's eyes darted briefly toward the overgrown path before returning to her, tension tightening his jaw. I hoped you wouldn't notice," he admitted quietly. "I've been keeping quiet about it." "Keeping quiet?" Agatha raised an eyebrow. "About what, exactly?" He swallowed. "Break-ins. Minor at first. Tools moved, lanterns shifted, footprints. Nothing stolen that would matter to Lady Forsyth, but enough to suggest someone's been snooping." He shifted on his feet, fidgeting with a stray glove. "I didn't want to alarm Charlotte. She's had enough to contend with already." Agatha folded her arms, the corners of her mouth tilting in mild exasperation. "So, you've been concealing evidence. And for how long?" "Months," he admitted. "I kept logs, notes, tried to anticipate patterns. Whoever it is seems cautious, deliberate. But yes, I avoided telling her directly." "And the historian?" Agatha asked, her gaze sharp. "Barnaby Feldon has been oddly eager to access estate documents. Perhaps it's mere coincidence, but—" Harold hesitated. "I've wondered the same thing. He's been around more than usual, requesting copies, asking questions under the guise of research. I didn't want to accuse anyone without proof, but yes, he's a possibility." Agatha considered his words. She didn't dismiss his suspicion entirely, but something about it felt convenient, too neatly aligned. Someone might have anticipated that the estate would be cautious, that a name with scholarly authority would draw suspicion. Convenient blame. Sometimes it's easier to suspect those who appear harmless. Harold looked pained, but nodded. "Perhaps. But you have to understand, it's not just documents. Whoever it is seems to want control over information. Not destruction, not theft, but knowledge. And the West Garden, that's where things are left or retrieved." Quietly, Agatha let the revelation settle. Footprints, lanterns, shredded deeds, now tied together under Harold's admission. It painted a picture of meticulous intrusion. Someone had been shaping events from behind the scenes, feeding just enough uncertainty to keep the estate off balance, while keeping Charlotte unaware. It wasn't chaos, it was control. "Have you noticed patterns?" Agatha asked, stepping closer. Harold nodded, rubbing his temple. "Mostly at night, though sometimes early morning. Fridays and Sundays seem busiest. Whoever it is, they know the estate's routines, and they exploit them." He glanced at her, a mixture of relief and worry in his eyes. "You've seen enough to understand why I've been careful." Agatha's mind worked quickly. The break-ins, the manipulated documents, the eagerness of outsiders to access records, it all pointed to someone orchestrating the unfolding drama, leaving Charlotte vulnerable without alarming her. Whoever it was, they understood human nature as well as they understood the estate's history. "Very well," she said finally, straightening. "We proceed carefully. We observe, we document, and we wait for patterns to emerge. But concealment won't protect Charlotte forever." Harold exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I know. I hoped to buy time." Agatha nodded, understanding, but resolute. The estate was no longer simply a picturesque setting. It was a stage for subtle machinations, and she intended to see the plot unravel, one careful step at a time.
The news reached Agatha just after breakfast, carried on the swift, breathless whisper of Mrs. Burstall, who hurried up Agatha's garden path without even pretending to have other business in the area. Terrible business, Agatha. Simply terrible. The activist, that Leela girl, she was found injured near the Dembley boundary. They say she took a fall, poor thing. An awful one. Agatha set down her teacup, feeling the familiar tug of concern, mixed with undeniable curiosity. A fall? Where exactly? Just beyond the old marker stone, Mrs. Burstall said, lowering her voice dramatically. But some say it didn't look much like an ordinary tumble. You know how people talk. Still, something feels odd. Agatha didn't need further prompting. Within minutes, she was grabbing her coat and bag, her mind already whirring through possibilities. Leela had been outspoken, bold, and not the type to simply slip on moss. The boundary had been a hotspot for tension lately, and the thought of someone taking advantage of the secluded path made Agatha's steps quicken. The hospital was quiet, with the soft beeping of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic hanging in the air. A nurse directed her to Leela's room, where Leela lay propped against pillows, her left arm bandaged, and a faint bruise coloring her cheek. Even so, her fire hadn't completely dimmed. Her eyes lit up when she saw Agatha. "You heard about it then. I suppose news travels fast in these parts." Agatha pulled a chair close. "Are you all right? They said it was a fall." "It wasn't," Leela replied quietly, glancing toward the open doorway before leaning closer. "I was pushed." Agatha felt a small chill trace her spine. "Pushed? By whom?" "I don't know," Leela admitted, frustration tightening her voice. "I heard someone behind me while I was taking photos of the boundary markers. I thought it might just be an estate worker, but the footsteps felt wrong somehow. Slow, deliberate. Then someone shoved me. I didn't even have time to turn." Agatha absorbed this carefully. Was there anything else? Anything you noticed before it happened? Leela hesitated, then nodded. "I heard voices just a moment before. One person said something about the settlement papers. It caught my attention because it sounded urgent, maybe even angry. I stepped closer, but I couldn't see them. The next thing I knew, someone came up behind me." Agatha leaned back, feeling the weight of the new information press into her thoughts. The settlement papers again. They had surfaced more than once, whispered, hinted at, hidden away, and now they seemed linked to a direct attack. "You're certain about the phrase?" "Absolutely. I've been replaying it over and over. I may not have seen anything, but I remember the tone. It wasn't casual." Agatha's gaze softened as she took in the young woman's shaken expression. "You're safe now, and whatever happened, we'll get to the bottom of it." Leela exhaled, the tension easing slightly. "Be careful, Agatha. Whoever did this wasn't trying to frighten me. They wanted to stop me." Agatha squeezed her hand gently, already forming a plan. "Then they've miscalculated. I'm not easily stopped." When she stepped back into the cool afternoon air, the village seemed unchanged. Quiet streets, distant bird song, the gentle hum of daily life, yet everything felt different. Someone had escalated matters. Someone willing to push a young woman in a secluded spot was growing desperate. Agatha walked home with long, purposeful strides, her mind turning the phrase settlement papers over like a smooth stone. Whatever secrets they held, they were dangerous enough for someone to harm for them. That alone told her she was closing in on the truth, and that the stakes had just risen sharply.
Chapter 7. Unraveling the Truth. Back in the comfort of her cottage, Agatha spread her notes across the dining table, arranging them into neat clusters. Maps, correspondence, fragmented deeds, hospital reports, and her own observations from the estate. The morning sun poured through the windows, painting the room in gentle warmth, a stark contrast to the tangled web she was attempting to unravel. She took a sip of tea, savoring the ritual while letting her mind run through the evidence. The falsified maps were the first thing that caught her eye. Minor corrections and smudges hinted at intentional ambiguity, each one capable of swaying an argument about ownership. Next were the missing documents.
torn pages from deeds hidden in the West Garden shed. Whoever had left them there clearly wanted them discovered by the right or wrong person, timing each move carefully. Agatha frowned, imagining the orchestrated sequence of events that allowed someone to remain unseen while controlling what information reached Charlotte. She took a sip of tea, savoring the ritual while letting her mind run through the evidence. The falsified maps were the first thing that caught her eye. Minor corrections and smudges hinted at intentional ambiguity, each one capable of swaying an argument about ownership. Next were the missing documents. Torn pages from deeds hidden in the West Garden shed. Whoever had left them there clearly wanted them discovered by the right or wrong person, timing each move carefully. Agatha frowned, imagining the orchestrated sequence of events that allowed someone to remain unseen while controlling what information reached Charlotte. Then there were the people themselves. Harold's nervous admission about concealing break-ins, Charlotte's avoidance of the West Garden, and the activist's sudden injury, all threads of the same complex tapestry. Barnaby Feldon's scholarly eagerness, Leela Trent's aggressive insistence on public use, and Oliver Thatch's visible anxiety over the legal minutiae. The pattern was emerging, but not yet complete. Each character's behavior was motivated, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly, but all were connected to control over knowledge and influence. Agatha leaned back, letting her eyes close for a moment as she reviewed the events in her mind. Nighttime activity in the West Garden, secretive document placements, and the timing of Leela's accident now hinted at a single deliberate escalation rather than a series of coincidental mishaps. Someone wanted disruption, not merely information. They had a clear endgame, and it did not involve casual mischief. Suddenly, a realization struck her. It wasn't just about historical ownership or environmental concerns. Someone stood to gain significantly if Charlotte was publicly discredited. Agatha's mind raced through the possible beneficiaries. Barnaby, whose reputation could benefit from exposing Charlotte's supposed neglect of archival records. Oliver, whose legal expertise could be leveraged if disputes escalated to formal tribunals. Even Leela, whose activism might be strengthened by undermining private authority. But the key detail that snapped her attention into focus was Oliver Thatch's behavior. The solicitor had been overly cautious, almost evasive, whenever sensitive matters arose. Legal manipulation, rather than historical fraud, now seemed the most plausible. Agatha's fingers tapped lightly against the table. Someone was not just playing with documents. They were orchestrating perception, engineering doubt, and exploiting the gaps in both memory and record. This accounted for the meticulously timed break-ins, the selective revelation of documents, and the careful cultivation of fear and uncertainty among the participants. Agatha leaned closer to her notes, connecting the dots in a web only she could see. The West Garden activity, the hidden deeds, and the broken lantern were not isolated incidents. They were part of a chain reaction designed to unsettle Charlotte and provoke mistakes, public reactions, or hasty legal missteps. Someone who was behind it understood human nature as well as they understood law and estate management. Finally, she made a decisive note. Observe legal behavior closely. Verify documents independently. Anticipate the next attempt to influence Charlotte. Agatha allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The puzzle was beginning to take shape. The picture was not complete, but for the first time, she could see the outlines of both motive and method. She leaned back, letting the warmth of her tea and the calm of her cottage balance the mental intensity. The threads were coming together, and when they did, the truth behind the disturbances at Dembley Gate would be revealed. The light had softened into dusky gold when Agatha approached the edge of Dembley Gate's estate, the air cool and still, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. She spotted Oliver Thatch lingering near the wrought-iron fence,
shifting uneasily from one foot to the other. The solicitor's spectacles glinted in the fading sunlight, and his pale fingers fidgeted with a sheaf of papers he had tucked under his arm. "Mr. Thatch," Agatha called, her voice calm but firm. "We need to speak." He flinched, startled, then forced a tight, nervous smile. "Mrs. Raisin, His words faltered as he glanced around, eyes darting to the shadowed hedgerows lining the driveway. "I didn't expect anyone at this hour." "I wasn't expecting a confession," she replied, stepping closer. "But you're clearly burdened. Speak freely. Who pressured you to alter the documents?" His lips pressed together. It wasn't my choice. Someone with knowledge of the estate and the legal process approached me months ago, threatened consequences if I did not adjust records, if I did not ensure certain boundaries appeared differently in the files. He hesitated, swallowing hard. "I was supposed to. I can't." A sharp rustle behind them cut his words short. Agatha turned instinctively, but the sound came from the shadows where the hedgerow thickened. From the gloom, Barnaby Felden emerged, eyes blazing with indignation. His tweed jacket was dusty from brushing against the leaves, his spectacles crooked, and his mouth twisted into a grimace that spoke more of rage than reason. "So this is what you're doing, Thatch, manipulating records, deceiving the rightful heir, and you think you can do it unnoticed." Oliver froze, fear etching every line in his face. "Barnaby, Step aside," Agatha interjected firmly, placing herself between them. "Enough shouting. I want answers, not threats." Barnaby's gaze flicked to her, narrowing, then returned to Oliver. "You've been too eager to follow orders blindly. History is not meant to be twisted by legal convenience." Agatha seized the moment of distraction to whisper sharply to Oliver, "Now, tell me everything, quickly." But before he could speak, Harold's voice called from the distance, crisp and commanding. "Barnaby, stop this at once." The groundskeeper appeared at the edge of the driveway, shovel in hand, his presence both practical and reassuring. The historian hesitated, glare lingering on Oliver, before he stepped back reluctantly, muttering under his breath. Oliver exhaled shakily, relief washing over his features. Agatha seized his arm gently. "Come with me, away from this. We'll regroup and figure out the next steps, safely." As they moved toward the gate, the last light of dusk stretched long shadows across the lawn, giving the estate an almost ethereal, secretive glow. Agatha kept her eyes on both Oliver and the retreating figure of Barnaby, noting the silent tension that still hummed between them. Someone was desperate to manipulate events at Dembley Gate, but for now the immediate threat had been diffused. The cool evening air carried a sense of cautious relief. Agatha knew this confrontation was only the beginning, but the pieces were slowly revealing themselves. And as the first stars appeared overhead, she felt the familiar spark of determination. The truth was close, and she would uncover it, carefully, completely, and without letting the shadowed threats dictate her next move.
Chapter 8. The Settlement Revealed. Agatha stood at the head of the drawing-room in Dembley Gate, the familiar walls now alive with an air of anticipation. The mismatched group she had observed with growing scrutiny over the past weeks was assembled once more. Charlotte Haringey poised with careful elegance, Oliver Thatch uneasy in his seat, Lila Trent still brimming with restrained energy, and Barnaby Felden, whose tweed jacket seemed even stiffer under the weight of the impending revelation. Harold hovered discreetly by the doorway, his eyes alert for any disturbance. "Thank you all for coming," Agatha began, her voice calm but carrying a quiet authority that drew attention immediately. "I've spent the past days reviewing events, documents, and observations. I believe I now understand what has been happening at Dembley Gate." A ripple of curiosity ran through the room. Barnaby's eyes narrowed, but he remained seated, frowning in apparent suspicion. Agatha held up a small folder containing the torn deed pages she had recovered from the West Garden shed.
These fragments, she continued, demonstrate that certain documents have been removed, hidden, and manipulated. Combined with recent break-ins, the altered maps, and the solicitor's undue influence, a pattern emerges, one pointing to deliberate orchestration. She paused, letting the words sink in. Someone has been fabricating a narrative implying the disputed land historically belonged to their family. This narrative has been supported by document theft, intimidation, and manipulation. And that someone is Barnaby Felden. A gasp fluttered through the room. Barnaby's lips parted, his face draining of color. "Mrs. Raisin, that is a most serious accusation." Agatha met his gaze steadily. "It is not an accusation without evidence. Your insistence on accessing records, your presence at unusual hours, the night disturbances in the West Garden, and your efforts to influence Oliver Thatch all point to a coordinated plan. The goal? To claim prestige and reclaim what you perceived as lost honor for your ancestors." Lila leaned forward, her eyes bright. "So all those rumors, the tension, the accident near the boundary, it was you orchestrating it?" Barnaby sputtered, trying to form a response, but the assembled evidence was damning. Agatha continued, unfurling one of the recovered deed fragments. "These pages were hidden in the shed you attempted to manipulate. They confirm your scheme, showing that you removed original documentation to create a false history." Charlotte's pale face relaxed slightly, relief mingling with lingering shock. I cannot believe someone would go to such lengths," she murmured. Her hands twisted lightly in her lap, still processing the betrayal but grateful that the threat had been identified. Agatha nodded, maintaining her calm demeanor. "It was a methodical attempt to destabilize your claim, Charlotte, to manipulate perception and law. The activist's injury, the solicitor's nervous complicity, and the repeated break-ins were all pieces of the same puzzle. It was never about historical accuracy. It was about controlling outcome and perception." Harold stepped forward quietly, his presence reassuring. "We can now secure the estate and documents. The disturbances are over." Agatha allowed herself a small smile, glancing at each of them. "The evidence has been revealed. The estate's true history remains intact, and those who attempted to alter it are exposed. The land belongs, by rightful record and by circumstance, to Charlotte Haringey." Barnaby, still seated, sank into his chair, muttering excuses and protests that no longer carried weight. The others exchanged looks of relief, their tensions easing as the story finally came into clarity. Agatha straightened, folding her hands calmly. Secrets have a way of surfacing, especially in places as observant as Dembley Gate. The estate endures, as do its rightful stewards once deception is stripped away. The room settled into a quiet understanding, punctuated by the soft ticking of the mantel clock. Charlotte exhaled, the tension in her shoulders finally easing, while Agatha felt the familiar satisfaction of piecing together another intricate puzzle, one that had challenged both her mind and her instincts. The estate's quiet dignity remained, now fully restored and affirmed.
Agatha sank into her favorite armchair, a steaming cup of tea cradled in her hands, the soft warmth seeping into her fingers. Outside, the late afternoon sun filtered through the curtains, casting a honeyed glow across the cottage. The events at Dembley Gate lingered in her mind, maps altered, deeds hidden, break-ins, near accidents, but the sense of resolution wrapped around her like a cozy blanket. For once, the estate's mysteries were laid bare, and the rightful order restored. The gentle hum of the village reached her ears, the distant chatter of neighbors returning from chores, the occasional bark of a dog, the soft clatter of a wheelbarrow on cobblestones. Almost immediately there was a knock at the door. Agatha set her cup down and opened it to find Mrs. Burstall and a few other villagers, all eager-eyed and flushed with excitement. "Agatha, we heard about Dembley Gate. Well done, dear. You've cleared up that muddle entirely." Another neighbor chimed in, "And the activist, she's safe now, isn't she?" Agatha smiled, motioning them inside. Tea was poured and biscuits laid out, the cottage filling with warmth, conversation, and the gentle rhythm of village life. They spoke in hushed tones about the revelations, relishing the unraveling of secrets, and occasionally letting slip the gossip that made small communities so delightfully connected.
Agatha listened with quiet satisfaction, enjoying the comfort of friendly eyes and animated voices, each detail reinforcing the sense that, for now, life in Carsley had returned to its gentle, curious equilibrium. Later, a small parcel arrived, carefully addressed in delicate script. She tore it open to find a handwritten note from Charlotte Haringey, along with a modest but thoughtful gift, a small, ornate paperweight engraved with the Dembley crest. The note read, in part, that Charlotte hoped to visit Carsley soon, both to thank Agatha in person and perhaps to enjoy a reprieve from the lingering tensions at the estate. Agatha held the paperweight in her palm, the smooth weight grounding her in the satisfaction of having set things. Even as she set the note aside and sipped the now-cooled tea, a faint smile tugged at her lips. The countryside, she reflected, was never truly quiet. There were always secrets, whispers, and small dramas waiting just beyond the garden hedges or down winding lanes, and that, she decided, suited her perfectly. It was a life that allowed for curiosity, clever deduction, and the occasional gentle thrill. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in soft apricot and lavender hues. Agatha leaned back, feeling the slow, calming rhythm of her home settle around her. Carsley was alive in its small, charming way, filled with neighbors, gossip, warmth, and the comforting promise that there would always be more mysteries to untangle, more lairs to discover, more quiet adventures to enjoy. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of pure contentment, the tea warm, the village serene, and her mind already planning what delight or intrigue the next day might bring.